Hey everybody, this is Modern Refugee. I want to take a little time here tonight to share some stories with you guys, and I'm going to leave it up to the audience whether or not that these stories are related to preparedness or they're just stories how people lived in austere circumstances. And I was insanely fascinating with these stories when I was a kid growing up, and I heard them from the time I was a young teenager up until my 20s, and they were stories that revolved around the migrant work camps that existed around here because of the agriculture. And these camps existed from after World War II all the way up to the mid late 1970s, and before mechanization sort of taken over. There was a large influx of Hispanic migrant seasonal workers that would come up here, and they would stay in camps. And the camps were basically two styles. There were barrack styles camps that had cafeterias, and then there were family camps, which were basically houses or cottages that held a um, pretty significant amount of people. And these stories were told to me by a couple different sources. One is as a relative of ours that actually inspected these camps for the county to make sure that they were in compliance, that they had a certain amount of running water, and they had flush toilets. And these were in the vegetable camps. The vegetable camps had to have running water, had to have flush toilets in them. But the sugar beet camps, they were more austere. They could have outhouses and still hand pumps as long as they had a certain amount of water that was available for cleaning. And these camps were inspected by my relative. And then the other person was one of my mom's friends, and she worked for one of the processing companies, and she was basically a liaison to the camp, help them get the supplies around what they needed, help them do things like get the stuff they needed to do laundry, repair clothing, because a lot of these processing places had some type of seamstress or sewing ability in them, whether it was sewing bags shut or whatever. They had that ability, so repairing clothes was something that she took care of. Making sure that they had some type of health care. If somebody got hurt or somebody got sick, she was sort of the liaison that took them to the local doctors to see that they had the health care. But the people lived very austere, and the the family camps were matriarchal to a certain extent. The checks came to an older woman in the camp, and then she doled out the cash for the different supplies or whatever that was seen fit. And how the system worked at the time was is the companies would give an allotment to the camps to buy their supplies, and then that would actually come out of the farmers' profits after the harvest. And it was basically negotiated, a certain dollar amount per acre, for the workers that were there. But how they lived, they had 3 square meals a day. It was all basically cooked. It was real basic stuff. When preppers talk about stuff, they talk about beans and rice. And I ask about that because there was a lot of talk about beans, cooked beans that they had. And they said rice occasionally, but it wasn't. It was pretty much some type of boiled meat that was boiled in large containers, because that was the most efficient way to cook for large amounts of people. And not all the food was hot either. Not all of it was spicy. That's another thing that I was told. But flour tortillas, cooked beans, some type of boiled meat. This was the food that they made pretty much every day. And I remember my relative saying he would go in to inspect the camps, and there'd maybe be 2 foot high stacks of tortillas and a half a dozen women making them. And this is one of the things that I found fascinating. They rolled the tortillas out with beer bottles, and why would they roll them out with beer bottles, you ask? And what I was told is because beer bottles were pretty much everywhere, and they didn't have to pack a rolling pin in when they came up from Texas, because beer bottles were pretty much everywhere. So they used what they had at that particular spot to make their stuff, because they packed very light and they didn't travel with a lot of stuff, and they sort of lived on the fly. And another thing, they would cook the tortillas on sheets of tin, either 10 or 12-inch squares of tin on the stove. They didn't even use any utensils to flip them. They would just use their fingers. They'd put the tortilla on, and when it would be done, they'd pick it up and they would flip it over with just their fingers. So they didn't even have any specific utensils to do that, which is another thing of just living on the fly and getting by with as little as you needed to. And a lot of the meals, breakfast would be made, and I was told that what we would call a breakfast burrito today was typically what breakfast was. It would be eggs, some type of meat, and that would be rolled up in a tortilla. Another thing that was cut into the eggs that I was told was green peppers. A lot of green peppers were used and cut up and put into these breakfast burritos. Lunch was actually made and taken out to wherever the work location was. And again, that's sort of different than how we live today. A lot of people today either make their lunch when they go to work or they get something wherever they're at. The times when people would make food and take it out to wherever a group of people were working, that's not quite as prevalent today as it was back at that particular time. Um, then at the main meal in the evening when they would come back, there would be a lot of stuff like there'd be maybe four men in an area, and there'd be a container of beans, and they would take the tortillas and they would dip in there and they would eat the beans right off of the tortillas. So it was the tortilla. I was told they were told that the tortilla was sort of like the perfect food. It could be used for a main course, it could be used as a snack, it could be made into a dessert. It was an eating utensil. It was just a lot of things, and that was why one of the reasons why the flour tortilla was so prevalent. But some type of boiled meat, usually pork, from what I was told, or sometimes it was if even beef heads would be boiled so they could take the meat off of that. But the flour tortillas and the cooked beans were pretty much straight across the board. Another thing is my mom's friend said that there would typically always be one man that would stay back with the women who were preparing the food at the location, either in the cafeteria or at the different cottage camps, so to speak. And I was actually told afterward by my relation that that was probably some type of foreman, and they would go around and they would check on the different work crews, plus keep an eye on what was going on at camp to make sure that everything sort of ran as smooth as possible. And I think it's just a good example when we look at these stories. People can get by with a lot less than what they think they can. And when you get into the modern preparedness movement, there's a lot of talk on groups and how people can, mags and groups and whatever. But when you look at these old school migrant work camps, these people all worked together, and they lived in austere conditions. And one thing that I was told specifically in these stories is there was very little violence or crime associated with these camps, because people in the camps pretty much minded their own affairs, and the elders would pretty much take care of sort of any problems that would pop up in these places. It was almost a tribalistic type society, where if you look at any tribal societies, elders make the decision on how things are going to be, and then the rest of the people sort of go by that. So it was an interesting take on that. But I really enjoyed these stories when I was growing up, and hearing how people lived and interacted with these camps. And a lot of these camps still existed when I was a teenager around here. I can remember one, and specifically that I drove past all the time when I was in my teens and late teens and early 20s. I remember that camp, and I wish it was still there because I would have got some video in it. But they've since tore that all down and plowed that whole area up. But it was a thing around here. There was a large influx of them, and these stories were told to me um, at a young age, and I wanted to share them with everybody because I think these stories need to be told and perpetuated, because I think there's lessons to be learned in them. But anyway, this is Modern Refugee. I appreciate all my subscribers out there. Hope you guys got a little information, a little entertainment out of this video here, just sharing some of my recollections on these work camps. You guys have a good one.